Hey guys, thanks for joining us on tonight's weekly Football Manager show. This week we've got myself, Paul, Ryan, and Ben has come on again this week as a guest. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
No problem. Good evening.
We're going to look into tactics again. It seems we've got such a good response last week from the show, as well as a few other things. First thing we are going to discuss is a new feature on our website, which you'll see streaming in the background there, which is each week we're going to recommend a YouTube channel. Basically, the reason behind this is I've been sitting watching a lot of YouTube videos lately, and a couple of people have stood out. So the first recommendation for this week to check out is by Statistical Approach. He's a fantastic YouTuber, and you'll find a link to his Liverpool series on the right-hand side of our website there. So it's definitely worth checking out. But we're going to get straight down into some tactical discussions and have a little chat basically about how our saves are going, what tactics we're using, etc. So if people want to comment and let us know what they're using also, and if they're struggling, give us some idea of why you're struggling if you need some advice. So Ryan, do you want to get us started on this?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about my tactic first, if you can get my post
No
open. I'm
problem.
using can I describe? It's more of a 4-2-3-1 adapted sort of style. It's very weird when Paul find it on my big massive post that's currently on the website. Ben didn't like it when I showed it him last week. He'll know, of all people, we had a massive discussion last week of my tactic that I was using at Tamworth that didn't work out too well. Eventually I got sacked and managed to find this tactic and employ it, and somehow first game I played it I won 7-0. What would you say about this tactic, Ben? It looks very weird, as you said, but it seems to work.
I'd say the 7-0 was kind of the surprise element. The opposition kind of going, "What the hell is this?" Because it's pretty aggressive. I think we'll say, won't we? Because it's rather
Yeah,
attacking formation. You've got a lot of offensive players there, and I realise it's going to have a different actual shape when the game gets going, but. You can see with the roles you've chosen that it's definitely very attacking. So you can see how it's ended up with such an onslaught of goals. And I guess your poacher's pretty good. I mean, you must have scored a few in that game.
oh yeah, I think he scored 4 in that game.
There you go. Yeah,
I
you had a
remember
great
rightly,
day.
and then he became one of the top goal scorers at the club. But I think he's actually left now because of the poor finances at the club. And I'm now no longer at that club at the moment. But we'll discuss that later when we get on to our FM saves. But I mean, I did make a slight change in this tactic throughout the season, as you'll see there in the heat map. The two players in the centre, which is the anchor man and the centre mid, are, as Paul would say, hugging each other. I think I changed the centre mid. If Paul goes back to the tactic, I can't remember what role did I set him to. Was it box to box?
Box to box, yeah.
Box to box. I think I set him more forward, and then the anchor man stays in that position. So you've still got that nice shape in the defence with the wing backs going forward and the full back on the left staying there. It just seemed to work well. The only games that it seemed to fall against was when the opponents had more attacking players and they just managed to get through the gaps, which you can see quite easily in the formation there on the right hand side between the wing back and the winger, which eventually I changed during games to be as a wide target man support, which drops him back further, so he's more of a right winger sort of player, and that seemed to work out quite well. And eventually, from being just avoiding relegation from when I first took over, the next season I managed to finish just outside the playoffs by one position, finishing 5th. Massive tactical turnaround, changing play, which worked out quite well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely. I think when I first saw the tactic, I was definitely surprised by it. I think when you look at it, for example, this number 31, the attacking midfield on the right, you have him set to attack, but he seems to perform more of a supporting role. I mean, I'm sure Ben will agree when you're looking at this, he seems to be sitting behind the playmaker,
Yeah, yeah.
which is something I would have suggested to change him to support, but it seems like your tactics is already implementing that on its own. I did mention to you that I think your poacher is either not getting far enough forward, or your advanced playmaker is sitting too far forward. But
Yeah.
again, because of your two midfielders, it's a tough one because I would like to see the anchor man sitting deeper, like we discussed off air. He's sitting a bit too high for my liking, just because of your fullbacks. I mean, your defensive line's fantastic because of what you've got set. With your fullbacks, one is a complete wing back attacking and one is a fullback attacking. You can see the slight variation from the right to the left hand side. But I think, as you can see there at the top of the screen, you won 7-0, so I don't think we can pick fault with it to the extent of saying you shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that.
No, that's true, but there's always ways to improve a tactic, and even if you won 7-0, that you just looking at the shape and things like that can help identify issues that perhaps didn't come up in this game but could come up in future.
No, it came up in because there's always better opposition in the league that I was in, and I
Yeah.
always looked back at the heat map, which
Yeah.
Paul drilled into me. Check the heat map after every game, which is what I've been doing, and
For
been
sure.
using that tactic. Whenever I lost, check the heat map, what went wrong, and when I was losing, it is exactly what Paul just said. The anchor man being too high left a massive gap, which my two centre backs just either
Sorry, I
seemed
lost
to.
you guys there. What did you say?
The anchor man, when Paul said earlier, where he's too high,
Oh, no, I'm gone.
that's where goals seem to come from. And the centre backs either seem to part like the Red Sea or just run away from the ball, and players just run through like Lionel Messi and score for fun.
I was just going to say one thing I would recommend to people who are struggling to decide why a tactic maybe is not working exactly, or if there's issues on the pitch, is can you see number 26 here, Ryan? You're Olivier Romero.
Yeah.
I would put money on that his work rate is less than number 31, number 2, and number 5. The reason behind that is obviously you can see the distance covered, and also number 31's average position is deeper, as we discussed. The fact he's run just under 2 kilometres less through the game, and he's also seems to be sitting further forward. He's almost sitting as a second striker, just out wide. There are situations where people could look at, check it out, find out if the work rate of the person, if his determination to actually take part in the game. Obviously, the fantastic addition on this year's Football Manager, where you can see the pros and cons. It might mention something in there, but there's obviously a reason behind why he's run less. His average position's further forward, even though, as we'll see on the other screen.
Do you know another one that's good to look at? It's where the position of the shots, like where a shot's coming from.
Yes.
If you're getting a lot of shots blocked, then it can often indicate that your build-up plays a bit slow, so all the defense are getting back into shape. And if they're inaccurate, then perhaps it's the opposite. Like things are a little bit too rushed, so they're just shooting waywardly. And if they're all coming from one particular area, that's an easy way to identify where an issue is. Because if we all remember how well David Moyes did last season with his cross kind of philosophy, and it wasn't working, but things weren't changing. So if he perhaps had set his team to some of the midfielders to run from deep, then they could have been picking up on the end of those crosses or the second balls, or trying routes through the middle instead of all out wide. It's just a way of trying to switch things up and perhaps noticing something after the game that you didn't see while it was all playing out in front of you.
Yeah. I think, I don't know about you, Ryan, but after last week's discussion, what I've been doing a lot of is what Ben often does, where I've been pausing the game in attacking movements, checking basically if the players are doing what I asked them to do, just seeing how my line looks in the attack and defence situation, seeing if they're lining up how I told them to.
Yeah, it's checking the line and checking the options, as Ben said last week. What options has the player got as he receives the ball? Where can he pass? That was exactly what I was looking for. Because when you're in lower league management, or lower league teams in real life, they tend to have this format of just hoofing the ball long and not just passing it on the floor and getting it playing simple football. That is exactly what I was trying to implement in the tactic that I managed to put in. Sometimes the ball would go long, but it was into space. So the wide target man, is a target man, so they always seem to search him and they sent the ball long. And then he would play a simple pass into the forward. The simple football was there in some ways, but in some ways it wasn't.
Yeah, I think I've noticed here Steve's come on. There's just to remind people, if people are new to listening, there's a question and answer section. So you can comment and we'll read it out and answer your questions. Ryan, do you want to explain them how to get to that?
Yeah, if you can't find it, I'm assuming these two have found it easily. Next to your name at the top, it'll be in a circle. Your name, not your picture that you have on Google Plus. Next to that, there's a circle with a question mark in it, and then next to that, there's boxes with more boxes in it. Click on that, and then click on Q&A. It will take you to the Q&A at the side, which will pop up, and then send your questions in. We'll answer them quite happily.
Yeah, for example, Steve85 has been on. One of the database creators on our website, creates Steve85 database. He just said, how long does it take you lads to create a tactic? Well, I'll answer that first. I created a tactic for the save I was doing yesterday, and to create a tactic, including going through pre-season alternate, I would say about 2 or 3 hours, and I'm not afraid to admit it just didn't work at all. I made a couple of tactics for this save I've been doing, and nothing seemed to work. And we're going to look at my tactic I'm using today on a save, which has just completely turned my FM form around. And I've gone back to basics, but yeah, it can take up to a couple hours because I end up sitting through my pre-season games and alternate before I'm happy. What about yourself, Ben?
I follow the philosophy of Football Manager itself, which is it'll never be perfect and it'll never be finished. So while I might take a while to create the tactic in its infancy, so like setting my shape, choosing my roles, and all that sort of stuff, it only really starts to come into play when the games are actually playing out in front of me and I have to make tweaks and try and fit the players I have into my philosophy and my way of playing football. And really, it's just always being worked on. Every single game, I'm doing something with my tactics to try and get an inch closer to perfection, which obviously it's never going to be, but it's always the dream, isn't it? But yeah, it takes me a long time. Like, for instance, I'm only 7 games into my Romanian season, and I know I keep looking at the website, and there's people on like their 3rd, 4th, even 7th season, and I'm like, bloody hell, how do you guys play so quickly? I just can't play any other way.
I think I was speaking. I think it was actually the Steve I spoke to last night. Or it might have been the night before. I loaded up Football Manager in the space of 5 hours. I'd played about 4 or 5 matches. It was just one of the longest nights of Football Manager. I mean, I have nights where I spend the whole evening just searching for players, but that night was just grueling, just staring at the tactics screen at times, just trying to work out what was going wrong. And unfortunately, I actually lost my job on that save, but.
I think I spend as much time trying to figure out what's going right as I do about what's going wrong.
Yeah.
It's things like that that make you realise how realistic FM actually is and how management is actually that difficult. It's not easy, and FM being so realistic as it is, and you having to stare at a tactics screen for so many hours and making minor tweaks that can just affect the littlest thing in the game to get a result. Shows how good FM is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know Nicholas has been on just to say that he's here. I
Hi, Nicholas.
I think he's won the European Championships with Wales.
Cheating.
I saw something about him doing really well, and he's just said the European champions here. So now Nathan Tucker's been on. Thanks for listening, Paul. He's just said, how would you suggest that players aside just got promotion from League 2 but can't get anything in League 1, played for, lost for, without scoring a goal? Ben?
Without scoring, so
Yes.
there's a big issue there. That's a good question. I'm not sure really. It's difficult to answer that because I would definitely try and play in a style that suits the players I have, because you're going to be on a pretty limited budget down on especially coming up from League 2 to League 1. So pretty much all the teams are going to be better than you. I think that's a given if you're newly promoted. So there's going to be a bit of a kind of let's try and cement our place in the league while we're the underdogs. So I think try and shore up a good defensive like shape and use your roles smartly to try and get people on the counter. Because if you think about it, most teams are going to try and come at you and think, oh, well, these guys are weak, we'll just roll them over. So if you can keep the ball, frustrate them, and hit them on the counter, then you've got a chance of winning 1-0. Like, it's not pretty, but it's going to get you results, and it'll stop you getting fired, and then you can build from there. As soon as you've got the stability in defense and you've stopped leaking goals, then you can start concentrating on scoring goals. I'll always maintain that you've got to fix your defense before you can fix your attack.
Yeah, that's the first thing I see there is he's played 4, lost 4, so there's been no draws at all, which as Ben's just said there, my main thing I look to do when I get promoted is to get points before 3 points, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Make sure you keep the clean sheet before you go looking for the goals, which ends up costing you the game. Counter-attack's my best friend. I played against FMC, have an online league, and I actually played that against Ryan. We came up against each other in the first game. And I literally just sat back all game soaking it off him, and I ended up winning the game. It was a fantastic tactical battle.
One important thing to remember, though, for Nathan and for anyone listening, is that it takes time to implement new tactical systems. That's why it's best to do all this in pre-season. Obviously, it's too late for him to do that now, but I would say don't tinker with it too much in the sense of don't make any drastic adjustments, because you want to have your familiarity or players' familiarity with the tactic as high as possible, because the lower it is, the less they're going to know what they're doing and things aren't going to work quite as you want them to. So don't chop and change dramatically from week to week. Just have faith in the choices you've made and let your players figure it all out and adjust, and then you can build from there. It's all about baby steps and building blocks.
Yeah. Look for example, if you're playing the 4-5-1, a lot of people don't think of the basics of just drop your wingers back and just form a solid 5 across midfield. Or keep an anchor man, then the solid 4 in front of that. Tag a man up front to hold the ball up instead of just booting it up for him to shoot randomly. You want him to hold it up and wait for the people to come into play. Just simple things. Like Ben says, if you're going to tinker with your tactics, do it sensibly. Tell them to be more disciplined so you're playing for the points. Tell them to stick to the positions if need be. Just make sure they're doing the simple things, because they'll train on them a lot quicker than they will if you decide to go from direct to retaining possession and changing all individuals to pass it shorter, for example.
Sure, and don't choose instructions if you don't know what they do, because that's just madness to try that, because it's just like throwing oil on a fire, like it's something it'll work. But if you go to the Football Manager Sports Interactive forums, there's a really good thread they've got on there called Tricking the Wizard, where they explain in detail what each tactical instruction actually does. Because there's some which I didn't realize that they actually did what they do, and I thought, that's really interesting, and it'll help a lot of people, I think, to actually know what their choices they make actually do.
That's a good little tip, yeah.
I don't know how to share that at all, but that's where it is. It's called Tricking the Wizard, Guide for Understanding Tactics.
I would say Nicholas is actually doing a save with Wrexham I know about. He's just said there he had the same issue. He trained with defending, and it helped him win 7 in a row. That's also a thing. I don't know about yourself, Ben, or you, Ryan, actually. But if I hit a bad run of form, I'll do all my weekly training on defensive. Then I'll do my match day training on attack training. But obviously my whole week is spent defending training, and it seems to solid myself up a lot.
Yeah, it's one thing that a lot of people seem to forget about is the training that they've actually got set. And if they've got it on attacking playing, it's going to affect how they play a match. If you've got training set to attack, players are going to attack more in a game because that's what they've been training to do. if you've been on a bad run, like Paul has just said, set your training to defensive. It will make them more defensive-minded on the pitch, and hopefully you won't be losing as much, or you may lose, but not by. You may lose 2-1, and your defensive play may seem slightly better than it has been if you're losing something like 5-0.
Yeah.
And you can get clues about that too, because when you do your scouting report from the next opposition, it gives you a breakdown of like the best attribute of the team, the worst attribute, and things like that. So if, for instance, the worst attribute for the team is their like height, then I'll do attacking set pieces because there's going to be a chance for goals from corners and things like that and free kicks.
It's also a good idea to check what your own team's worst attribute is on the team report, which is a lot more accessible on Football Manager 15. Just click on your team report. If your team's one of the worst at passing, then don't play a passing game, for example. Nathan's been back on. He said his passing is decent. He just can't create anything or keep it tight at the back. He's playing 4-2-1-2-1.
Is that four?
That's
two
what I'm going to ask.
defensive midfielders and then one above that, and then two wingers, and then I think I can picture it. But
can you just let us know where the people are on the pitch? I think because straight away they're not. There's no line in front of the defence. You've got no lines looking at that.
True, and the roles will be important too, because if all the roles are attacking, for instance, then that shape's never going to keep.
Yeah.
Steve's actually just made a comment about what he's noticed in non-league and low league is bringing fast strikers. You will never find a fast defence. Simple 4-4-2 direct passing is key. We'll be coming in there in a minute, Steve. Actually, so stop stealing my thunder.
I've noticed exactly that with what Steve said, and it worked on my tactic. The two wingers that I had, they're both very, very quick, and they created things just. And the poacher, which eventually, when he wasn't so deep, as Paul said earlier, when he finally managed to get forward in games, all the players had to do was just cross it, or run down the wing, cross it into him, and it just was quite fun.
Yeah. Andre's been on. He said his team seems to shoot a lot, even though he has it get the ball into the box and shoot less often instructions. He's dominating the whole game, but they end up suffering a really crappy goal. I had that issue, Andre, with Marco Reus, as Ryan will know.
Yeah.
And the way I managed to get him to stop doing that was I changed his duty to a supporting role instead of an attacking role. It is making him drop back a lot more. It's kind of affecting his his ability at running at the opposition. He doesn't do it as much, but it's definitely cut his shots. I mean, there was a point in a game against Ryan where he must have had about 15-20 shots in the game. Every single one of them was from stupid positions as well.
I think it'd be really interesting on Andre's save to see the average positions, because depending on which player, of course, or players that are shooting from range, maybe they just don't have any passing options and their only option left is just to shoot. So perhaps they're too far apart and they've just got no one to give the ball to, so he's like, oh, fuck it, I'll just shoot then. And then it goes miles over.
Nathan's been on. He's got two centre-backs, two full-backs, two defensive mids, two wingers, one attacking mid, and one striker.
There's a gap. There's going to be a gap between the attacking play and the defensive play. Massive gap in the midfield. And if you're in the lower league, which most teams that I seem to come up against either play 4-4-2 or they fill the midfield in any way possible, they're just going to run into that gap, which is where that formation seems to fall.
And you'll find that in his average positions.
Yeah, if you check your average position map and post it on our Facebook group and just drop us a tag on it, and so I think it's actually going to be interesting to look at. If you post your average positions and also just your main tactics screen, so I can see the roles. But straight away, if I played against that in the lower leagues, I'd flood the midfield and I'd completely dominate. I'd play down the flanks to avoid your defensive midfielders, which means as soon as they push up to try to chase my central midfielders, I'm spreading it wide and I've just completely took your whole midfield out of it. So definitely needs looking into.
I think one thing we could do when you go on to FM Port later, if we show everyone how to look at the average positions and how to get onto it on FM, because I don't think a lot of people seem to know how to get to it. It is a vital thing to look at. I mean, I used to look at it, but not as much as I do now.
Sure, I mean, we can go and do that now. We can drop into that now before we talk about our saves. So if you just bear with me
Hold
one
on, just
second.
before we move on,
Sure.
what Andre said about kind of getting players to do what he wants, so he wants them to stop shooting from range and stuff.
Okay.
You've got to remember that these little AIs, they're minds of their own in a way. They're not like they're not actual artificial intelligence, but they're little computer little sprites. They'll tell you will do whatever they want in the context of the game. So it's not really an issue of getting the players to do what you want. You have to kind of build your tactics based on their own talents. And if players you have aren't doing what you want, then you have to bring in new players.
Yeah.
It's kind of a case of working with what you have, identifying what isn't working, and getting new guys in who do work.
Yeah.
And there's always somebody out there who's better for you and suits you more, but there's always a risk in making signings. So it's a difficult game sometimes.
Mm. I think another thing on that, I always seem to look at. I mean, Andre said that his players seem to shoot a lot. I always seem to look at players. I think the decision stat is still on there. There's an attribute is still on the player attributes. I always look at that. If their decision making is poor, I don't even bother looking at them.
Yeah.
Because if they're just going to shoot from anywhere, it means that they're not looking if there's a pass available and thinking, oh, I've just got to get rid of the ball, so I'm either going to lamp it or shoot from anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And look at their player preferred moves as well, because maybe he's got likes a long range shot or something like that in his preferred moves, and then that's something you could either try and train out of him, or he's just going to always try it because that's just the way.
Yeah. And Andre's been back on. He said he's running a 4-1-1-3-1, but his attack midfield is a playmaker support. He drops back near to the centre mid, so the average positions would look more like a 4-3-3.
So is that I can't picture that. Is it kind of like a Christmas tree?
I think it's basically like the standard 4-5-1. If you think of a 4-5-1, so if he's playing a defensive midfielder, then one central midfielder, but the attack midfielder's dropping back to form a two central midfielders with the DM behind him and then the two wingers.
Yeah.
But we'll go on to this tactic, which I think, like I was saying, today I've gone back to basics, we can say. I've gone back to just a basic 4-4-2 in my save as Stockport County, which was voted for on our Facebook group. They decided for me to do this save. 10 games in, I think it is. I'll just so you know that the tactic's working. As you can see there, pre-season I changed a couple. But 10 games in, and I've lost one, drew a couple, but mainly picked up some victories. So Ben, do you want to just assess why this 4-4-2 is successful?
What league is Stockport in again?
In the Vanarama Conference North.
Okay, so that's just before League 2, right?
You need to present Paul as well.
Two below. Sorry about this.
So
yeah,
it's
two below.
So it's kind of building on what Ryan was saying, where everybody at that kind of level is it's not tiki-taka. Let's say it's not exactly aggressive pressing and passing intricately and things like that. It's more back to basics, really, isn't it?
Yes.
So I think a 4-4-2 kind of a flat 4-4-2 like that really suits that kind of level. And presumably, you've taken over Stockport, who already have a team set up to play that kind of football. So I think
yeah, they're a very average team.
Yeah.
You expected mid-table, and I've had to bring in a few players just to solid the midfield up, basically.
But because you've gone for a pretty generic 4-4-2 shape there, you've got all the strengths and weaknesses of 4-4-2, which is one of your strengths is you're going to have a lot of width, and your wing plays are going to be important. Two solid banks of four, which is great for defending. I mean, you often see, like, I was listening to a Blizzard podcast the other day, and they were talking about how whenever Barcelona, how Barcelona always had that kind of win the ball back in 6 seconds rule.
Yes.
And if they didn't do it, they'd go straight to 4-4-2. That would be their first port of call, because it was the best way to defend. It was the most solid defensive shape to together. Anyway, but some of the strengths you're going to get is weaknesses rather is you could get outnumbered in the middle. I mean, that's often a problem that 4-4-2 teams have at the highest level. Look at Man City in Europe, for example.
I think,
no.
Ben, what we'll do is we'll, as you talk about this, I'm going to show my only defeat of the season.
Yeah.
Because, as we saw, there's actually a very good reason and a very good point which you're making about getting overrun.
Yeah.
This is where we were talking for Nathan, where we said to show us your average positions. You go into the match which you've played, you click on Analyze, and then it'll show up here. Just bear with my computer a second. So there you go, Ben. As you can see there, that's mine.
It's Tamworth, isn't it? Oh, there you go.
There you go.
The solid 4-4-2 there. You can see the slightly dropped off guy who's the central midfielder, defensive duty. And then my deep lying forward there dropping off. So you're basically forming this triangle we were talking about.
That's great though, because you've eliminated one of the biggest weaknesses of 4-4-2, which can often happen is the strikers getting isolated and not being able to link with midfield. So by having a deep lying forward in there, you've created that link and removed that weakness, which is obviously going to be a strength going forward for Stockport.
Yeah.
And then he's going to have lots of passing options then for the triangle.
But what I would say is every single game I've had, it's kept this solid form, and anybody who's struggling out in the low reaches, this basic tactic I think is the way to look. But as we'll look at Tamworth, there are ways to completely dominate the game, and I kind of, when I lost, now we've looked at the game, now I've assessed it, it's kind of fair play to Tamworth because this is how they've basically controlled the game over me. As you can see there, they've basically got it's 4-5-1, but very central, isn't it?
Yeah, they've completely overrun you in the middle.
Yeah.
And they've taken all the focus away from the flanks, which is your biggest strength.
Yeah. So I mean, anybody who's playing against a 4-4-2, this is maybe a way you can try to counter it. I mean, what do you say, Ryan, about this?
Yeah, it's exactly as Ben said. They've took the play into the middle, which in the average position they look like they're all hugging each other, but during the play it's going to be one person on the ball. They're all playing it in the centre. Your players are going to try and come in, which will take out the wide play that you want in that 4-4-2 formation, and they've just broken your 4-4-2 apart. And then they can easily try and either attack down the flanks themselves or just play through the middle. And
I think they'll just go through the middle with that, and with the Bulls midfield taken out of the question, that's going to lead to balls in behind the midfielders, and then look how many numbers they've got. At least 3 or 4 are going to be pouring forward whenever the 2 defenders are trying to come out, and they're just going to get destroyed, just pass through them.
I mean, we're going to Tamworth shots. I think we've
all in the middle.
Goals were all from the middle. Some of them were wonder strikes. I mean, look at how the distance of some of them. But then again, none of them are from the corners of the box. That one there hit the woodwork. I mean, it's like they all had a bet with each other who could score the best goal.
Yeah, because they were just laughing about how much space they were getting in the middle. They were like, free shots.
I'm not joking. There was points in this match where I just sat back and applauded some of the play. And then before you know, you're 4-0 down and thinking this game's gone.
Gosh, did you have no shots? You selected Stockport and no one come up?
I think it's because I had it selected on shots saved.
Ah, okay. I was going to say, that's quite scary if you've had no shots.
Full selection. Leave my team alone.
I do like the rules you've chosen there, Paul. That's really good. You're gonna get the best out of that 4-4-2 using those rules. That's an excellent choice on all of them.
I think it was Football Manager 2013 brought me back to my 4-4-2 after a few years away with the Derby County save, and I had Will Hughes as the box to box with the basic central midfielder defensive next to him. Ever since then, I've used 4-4-2 a lot more because I seem to pull away from that in around 2005.
It's because there's such a stigma about it. Like this whole 4-4-2 is dead and blah blah blah, but it's perfectly valid if you have the players for it. And it's just this kind of, it's like this almost kind of hipster kind of, oh, you can't play 4-4-2, it's too old fashioned and stuff. But I don't know, it's such a good base for building a tactic, because if you put your players into a 4-4-2, you can see what they're made of and then go from there.
Yeah. I know Steve's asking, do you use team instructions? Just quickly going to my team instructions there. Um, this in the general, I think, is vital when you're in the low leagues and you're playing 4-4-2, which is be more disciplined. Basically, I think without that ticked, my structure just falls apart. Um, and then I've got direct passing, but I want the ball cleared to my flanks, play wide, exploit the flanks. Basically, anything to encourage them to get down the wings, as well as close down much more. Because kind of in the model of Barcelona, you could say, I like to see my players chase the ball all game long. I do concede a few goals near the end of games, and if you are doing that, it points towards that could be an issue. But I have to have it on. What I would say, Steve's also asked for player instructions. No matter what team, no matter what formation, one instruction I set is distribute to fullbacks or distribute to defenders in general. The reason behind that is where we showed you the average positions, etc. You can see your passing percentage per player. And what I find is if you don't distribute short with your goalkeeper, unless you're playing with a goalkeeper who has exceptional sweeper skills, so he's a better passer of the ball, you're going to find that he has a between 20 and 30% passing distribution percentage normally, and you'll find that, you'll find you just get hit. From a goal kick, you'll be on the defensive again far too often. So I find just distribute to the fullbacks and build your attacks from there.
Yeah, you're basically just giving the ball away when you do a long kick.
Yeah. But then when you're distributing to your fullbacks, you normally want them to run wide with the ball. You don't want to pass it to your fullback and then for them to cut inside and lose it, because then you're just basically saying, "There you go, striker, 1-on-1, go for it." You want him to go on.
Go on.
No, sorry, go on.
I was going to say because you're playing so wide, the only potential weakness you can have is if a team plays a quick ball over the top of your midfield, because then because obviously with the 4-4-2 you haven't really got any defensive midfield cover, so with your fullbacks so wide, there might be an issue with somebody just playing it through the centre to an attacking midfielder.
I find that, but when I don't have the ball, my fullbacks don't sit too far wide.
Oh, okay.
I do agree if, for example, my left back pushes up and then he loses the ball, he's obviously hugging the touchline, so there's that gap. But I suppose any tactic has a weakness.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So,
and that's how I set up my approach to a game, is to look at what my opponent is likely to play.
Yeah.
And then kind of build from there. I want to exploit their weaknesses and maximize my strengths.
Yeah.
It's always better if you can predict what it's going to do.
Just put the website back on the background for you instead of boring you with my save screen all game, all the way through the stream.
Speaking the comment there from Nathan, I think he's got the wrong end of the stick in the sense that playing for draws. Because I know that's what you said, Paul, but you didn't mean it in the sense of just try and win.
No, I just mean, obviously, if you're losing games, try to see how you can draw them first off. Try to kind of solid yourself up a bit, basically.
Yeah, it's about working on your, just speaking to Nathan, it's about working on your defense, Nathan, and trying to soak up the pressure that your opponents are going to put on you because you're the weaker side. And they all know that in the game. So they're going to try and expose your weaknesses and just overrun you at the beginning of the game, or even throughout the game. So your job as the promoted side is just to frustrate them, stop them getting any joy in front of goal, and then hitting them on the counter-attack until you build some momentum, and then you can start building a reputation, and then you can get to more creative football, because you're not going to get that immediately.
And points on the board is always going to bring confidence within the team. Once you get that 1 point, if you're losing 4 in a row, 5 in a row, even if you get a draw, that's a point on the board.
Yeah, it's siege mentality, isn't it? It's like what Alex Ferguson used to do, just shut up and get on with it, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think what I was meaning was, I always think if you fix all of your not all of them, you can never fix all your mistakes, but if you can fix the mistakes which are costing you goals, that's what I mean when I say play for the point, because you're fixing your mistakes. Then once you've fixed your mistakes, you then look to create chances from that. But you can't create chances to score goals if you're still making mistakes, because you're not going to be able to create them chances. You're going to be too busy trying to fix your defence, basically. Your team's going to be always on the back foot if you're making mistakes.
Absolutely. And then if you lose, like you were saying earlier, Paul, if you lose possession in a dangerous position, then you're basically screwing yourself over. So you don't want to be trying to play this brand of football that just isn't going to work at that level and against the opposition that you're playing, because they're just going to pick up on those mistakes and punish you.
Yeah, exactly. Nathan said that he has posted it on our Facebook group. And people who are listening, I know there's been a lot of response on Twitter, which was fantastic to see. People who are listening through the links on Twitter, if you go to Facebook, you'll find us FMCentral on Facebook. As well as on our website, you'll see down the side a link to our Facebook group, as well as our Football Central Facebook group. So you can find us there. We're always happy to help out anybody who comes in. Just message us any time of the day and night. Ryan will be awake.
That's true.
If not, if you tag him enough, his phone beeps enough to wake him up.
I shouldn't have got my phone fixed now.
I know that from experience. Well, we've got 3 minutes left. Once again, tactics has took up 2 weeks of our show now. So Ben, basically, you're still playing a save which you were doing when you spoke about it last week.
Yes.
So do you want to just tell us a bit about that?
Well, I'm still Astra Georgiou in Romania. I'm currently recovering from a poor start to the season where I was still trying to figure out my tactics. I had a couple of draws early on, which in the Romanian league kind of puts you quite low down because there's kind of a split between really good teams and really bad teams. So I had my poor start against some bad teams, and I've finally started picking up now. So I've qualified for the Europa League by the skin of my teeth with an absolutely mental game against Lokomotiv Moscow. Beat them 5-3 in the first leg, and then they went 3-0 up in the second leg, and I managed to scrape it back to 3-2, I think it was in the end. So I lost the game, but I ended up going through. And then after that, I think I had my first Europa League game. I was playing an absolute minnow from Portugal. I think Nacional Madeira or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
I completely underestimated them. I played a weakened team, and they absolutely smashed me. So I have to go back to the basics with my team and figure out where I'm going tactically, which players have let me down, and I'll build from there, I think. So watch this space.
Well, I think if you listen back to the show, we can offer you some tactical advice.
Yeah, you guys are good. I'll definitely come here for some more advice.
Ryan, do you want to just mention, obviously, they'll be able to see in the background there, your admin adventure, the journey to Manchester United?
Yeah, I don't know how long it's going to take me to get to Man United, because I've been sacked 3 times already. But I started off at Coventry, and after 4 months and a takeover that took place, the board just weren't happy, and I couldn't seem to get the players playing. I got sacked from there, and then I went down to semi-professional football with Tamworth, where they were really struggling. I think they were in the relegation zone when I took over, and I managed to keep them up. And then second season, they wanted me to push for the playoffs, which I thought was a bit ambitious for the board. I think I was 7th, and they were like, oh, they called me into a board meeting, and they weren't happy. We want you to push for playoffs, and then they wanted me to get 9 points in 3 games. So that's 3 wins. I thought that's not going to happen. After 2 games, sacked. Another club done. I thought I'm going to go out of England. Ended up at Royal Genthius Athos, which I think is how we say it. If any Belgian fans are listening, you may want to tell me how it's actually pronounced. I went there. They were another team struggling in administration in the relegation zone. I kept them up. Next season, I managed to come just outside of the playoffs. And then this season, 3 games to go of the season, I got sacked from there because the board felt that I had basically lost the dressing room. The morale had all gone because I wanted players that weren't playing or players that were poor just gone. But the board was saying, no, they've got to stay. But the journey continues. As this show has been going on, I've been applying to jobs. Hopefully, I'm going to try and get back to my lovely country of Australia, and they won't be too harsh on me there because football's not the main sport in that country. But we'll see how it goes.
It's Atois, it's pronounced.
Atois. Ah, yeah, it's French. That would make sense.
Doesn't matter, he's been sacked now anyway, doesn't it?
Just before we go though, I've got a. If anybody needs a right back, go for Alexandru Matsel from AFC Astra, who's my team, because he is available. He's leaving on a free transfer at the end of his contract by default, so he's a free player you can pick up in the second season.
There you go, fantastic little tip there. And before we go, I did promise I would do some plugging. Just bear with me for 30 seconds, lads. And the first one I'll do is Steve's, because he has been listening tonight. So Steve85, FM15 transfer database. And basically, once Sports Interactive have released the game, some dedicated lads make some databases, and Steve's one of the two on our website. So you can download it with instructions to show you how to do it, with players like Martin Odegaard added to the database, as well as some Wonder Kids. And the next one is the Football Manager Whiz Kids. They create a database also. James, who people know comes on our weekly football show. Once again, Odegaard and the likes of Lee Clark have been added to that. Instructions also on that to show you how to download it. You can find them in our menu, FM15 database downloads, and you'll also find in there some databases that we've been making ourselves, such as the Australian second tier and all the European leagues unlocked now. So if you want to play Malta or Estonia, get it done. But thanks for listening. Thanks for coming on, Ben.
Pleasure.
Thanks for coming on, Ryan, as always.
Fine.
And hope to see you all back next week.